Alright, this is going to be Chapter 8, Part 3 of 3. And in this one, we're going to talk about 4.0, the peripheral nervous system, which includes the cranial nerves. You need to know those. Later on, whenever we start talking about neural assessment, we'll talk about cranial nerves that are affected, as well as assessment of the cranial nerves. The spinal nerves, nerve plexuses, reflexes as far as a clinical note, sensory and motor pathways, extrapyramidal motor syndromes, cerebral palsy, and headaches. 4.1 cranial nerves. A good thing to remember, if you can put this to memory: oh, once one takes the anatomy final, very good vacations are heavenly. Oh, once one takes the anatomy final, very good vacations are heavenly. And these are the cranial nerves, and this is a good acronym to remember them. These are the cranial nerves. If you'll take note, these come out near the stem. All of the cranial nerves come out pretty high as far as the spinal column, which an area that would still be considered the brain stem. This is the cranial nerves and what they do. Once one takes is these: olfactory, optic, ocular motor, trochlear. And these are a brief description of what each one of them do. Olfactory, obviously that's going to be the sense of smell. Optic, sight. Ocular motor, movement of the eyeballs. And if you'll ever see a doctor do a neural exam, he'll say, will you follow my pen with your eyes and your eyes only? Or if you're assessing someone for nystagmus, if you think that they may have be under the effects of an intoxicating substance. So these would be affected if you have, if you actually have some kind of cerebral deficit, whether it be from an intoxicating substance, drug, or from head injury. T for trochlear, smallest cranial nerves, oblique muscles of the eyeball, and this is going to allow for lateral movement of your eyeball. 4.3, they're continued here. Trigeminal nerve, largest cranial nerves, face and chewing. And trigeminal nerve, if you have sinus pain or you have teeth pain, this can also affect the trigeminal nerve and give you pain in referred areas. Abducens nerve, lateral rectus of the eyeball, so movement laterally of the eyeball. Takes the anatomy final, very is the acronym continued in this. Facial nerve, taste receptors, and facial expression. And then vestibulocochlear nerve, and this is auditory nerve for hearing. Good vacations are heavenly, as the acronym continued here. 9, which is glossopharyngeal, and this is going to be tongue and pharynx, pharyngeal muscles. And then the vagus nerve, visceral pharynx, diaphragm, abdominal pelvic, and this pretty much includes all the organs located in there. 11 is an accessory nerve, spinal accessory nerve, voluntary muscles, the palate, your pharynx and larynx, so the ability to talk. And then 12, hypoglossal nerve, and this is the tongue muscles that would control your tongue. So swallowing would be a very important part here. And 4.5, spinal nerve plexuses. In development, skeletal muscles commonly fuse and form larger muscles innervated by nerve trunks, and these nerve plexuses essentially control very large areas. It's also how you can get referred pain. So if you're receiving pain stimulus or sensory input from any of these will an example of this: you may get right shoulder pain whenever you're actually having a gallbladder attack, or you might have left arm pain or tooth pain whenever you're having a heart attack. Pardon me. These nerve plexuses would send the stimulus for the nerve trunks. Not only do they innervate the nerve trunks and help you to move the muscles and the organs within them, but they also would receive sensory input, and we'll see this a little later on. Pardon. 4.55, and this is dermatomes. Now, example of this, or what this is if you have numbness along this line, T3 is probably where your injury is at. And same with this. This is on the back. This is the anterior, and this is the posterior view. If you have a T7 injury on the posterior area, then right through here is where you would be getting numbness, tingling. If you had a spinal cord sever from that point down, you wouldn't feel any stimulus. So these are dermatomes, and these help us isolate in neural exams where the person might actually have an injury to their spinal column. 4.6 reflexes, autonomic motor responses to specific stimuli, and this allows rapid adjustment of the body. 4.7 simple reflexes. Whenever we talk about a simple reflex, it pretty much comes in phases, and these are the phases of that. The arrival of the stimulus and the activation of the receptor, the activation of a sensory neuron, and this is going to be in the dorsal horn, information processing by an interneuron, activation of a motor neuron. This never makes it to the brain. This is all in the nerves. And then a response by an effector. Example of this, I put my hand on the stove, it was hot, and I immediately removed it. And this is the example here. Step 1, arrival of the stimulus, and the stimulus is the tack. This is received by the receptors. It comes in the sensory input, which is the dorsal horn, and it immediately goes out to the activation of a motor neuron and says, hey, get your hand off the tack. Figure 8.34 in your book, and this is going to be a stretch reflex, and this is another immediate reflex arc, to where if we stimulate a tendon or ligament and we tap it with that hammer, the information to that muscle is taken into the dorsal horn and an immediate response, and this is without our being aware of it, or this is without us being aware of it. Complex reflexes. We have withdrawal reflexes, and we have reciprocal inhibition. Withdrawal reflexes move stimulated parts away from the source of the stimulation, and reciprocal inhibition, when one set of motor neurons is stimulated, those controlling the muscles are inhibited. So whenever we get one of these reflexes and we start to remove our hand from the actual hot fire, it's not like at that point the reflex of it would be we could not initiate our hand back down on there. So whenever in that split second it took to move it, we could physically have forethought there and then put our hand back on it. But during the reflex, we could not move it the other way because it would be inhibited. Example of this is in figure 8.35. Again, painful stimulus into the dorsal horn. Sent to the brain. Brain says, yeah, go ahead and move that. This is the flexor stimulated, and then this is the inhibitory part here, and our hand moves. Clinical note here, abdominal reflex and plantar reflex. Abdominal reflex is done by moving the end of the hammer is the easiest thing, or some kind of rigid device in a swooping fashion away from the umbilicus, and what we'll see is contraction of this muscle here. In the plantar reflex, whenever we stimulate the bottom of the foot, what we should see is this is from the side. Let's say that this is the big toe, and then the foot like so. We should see the toes come down, and an arch form in the foot. Now the point of this is that the foot is moving away from the stimulation. One more thing on this. Their toes should not go back the other way. This would expose the foot to the stimulation. So this would, plantar reflex is also called a Babinski's, and if a person exposes the palm of their foot towards the stimulus, it's considered a positive Babinski sign. 4.13 sensory and motor pathways. We have the posterior column pathway, fine touch, pressure, vibrations, position, sensation to the cerebral cortex, and then we have the cortical spinal pathway, also called pyramidal system, conscious voluntary control of the skeletal muscles, and the medial and lateral pathways, subconscious involuntary control of the muscles is what they take care of. This is a homunculus, and we're going to learn more about this in neurology, or the neuro assessment portion, that each one of these is a section that is controlled. So facial area, expression, jaw movement, tongue, hand, foot, leg movement, sexual organ. All of these are controlled by this part of the brain, and then this posterior column here is what has physical control over those, whether the information is coming into the dorsal horn, being processed, and then an appropriate action is made from the controlling part of the brain. Remember, dorsal is sensory and ventral is motor. The cortical spinal pathway, and again, another homunculus, motor homunculus. Hands, tongue movement, talk. So if a person had a stroke in this area, it would affect their larynx and probably the cranial nerve associated with that. Tongue movement from this area here, arm movement from this area here, leg movement from this area here, and so on. This would be the output side, and this would be the cortical spinal pathway. Information coming down from this area, let's move that part or piece, would come down this area here and then go to the appropriate motor area from the ventral side. Clinical note, extrapyramidal motor syndromes. And what occurs here is dopamine is a neurotransmitter in the brain. So these symptoms or syndromes are caused from the blocking of dopamine. It's pretty similar to Parkinson's. Muscle spasm can actually occur to the point to where the patient is nearly rigid from the muscle spasms. Drooling can occur as well. If a person isn't looking for it or looking into their medical history or their med list, anything that blocks dopamine could cause this, and Benadryl is the antidote. An example of this would be a phenothiazine or the drug Finagrin. If you take the drug Finagrin and then you have an onset of rigidity to where the patient can't move, they're trying to communicate, they may not even be able to talk, this would be considered an extrapyramidal syndrome. And Finagrin is one of the drugs that can actually cause that. The brass tacks of Finagrin is it blocks dopamine, and then Benadryl would be the treatment in this case. And then you'll almost get instantaneous results from this. Clinical note, cerebral palsy. We hear about it all the time. It's caused from about 5 to 10 minutes of hypoxia at birth. Generally is whenever we can see cerebral palsy. In a developing mind is whenever we initially see cerebral palsy actually occur. So, but it's caused from hypoxia for about 5 to 10 minutes on the clinical note. Another clinical note, headache. We have several kinds here that are talked about. Migraine, cluster, and tension. Migraine is caused by decreased blood flow, causing dilation of the cerebral arteries. It can be preceded by an aura. A cluster headache, unilateral pain, and oxygen is generally an effective treatment in cluster headaches. Oxygen gives us a little bit of vascular constriction in the head. So what can occur whenever we get these unilateral pains and from the dilation of these cerebral arteries is whenever they're tightened down a little bit, the pain kind of goes away. And then tension headache, non-pulsating, no nausea or vomiting, and these are just a general headache, generally caused by stress or lots and lots of work. The autonomic nervous system, 4.19, the sympathetic division, clinical node on the sympathetic nervous system, and then the parasympathetic division, also another clinical node on the parasympathetic nervous system. Relationships between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. So this is a very important concept, 4.20, to wrap your head around. We have preganglionic neurons and postganglionic fibers. So essentially what we have is this would be the pre, and this would be the post. And this is where all of the action is going to get done, in the post. Now, all preganglionic fibers, whether they are sympathetic division or in the parasympathetic division, are cholinergic. And what I mean by that is that these fibers use acetylcholine. So a good thing to remember, and this will come back again in pharmacology, is whenever we say cholinergic, what we mean is that it uses acetylcholine, cholinergic, as its primary neurotransmitter. And then postganglionic fibers. In the autonomic nervous system, fibers from the ganglion to the effector organs are also called postganglionic fibers. Alright, so we identify what nervous system it is by what it accepts on the post side. And I'm going to clear this off of here. So let me elaborate on that. If you are a preganglionic fiber and you spit out acetylcholine, I still don't know what you are. It isn't until I identify what the post is taking. If the post takes acetylcholine, then you're parasympathetic or cholinergic. If the post site takes norepinephrine, which happens to be an adrenergic neurotransmitter, then you are adrenergic or a sympathetic receptor site. It depends on what the post takes. Now, I know this may be confusing at this point, but we identify what type of receptor site it is by what the postganglionic fiber receives. The sympathetic division. This is considered fight or flight. This is running off of adrenaline. The preganglionic neurons are located at T1 and L2. Now, this poses a problem. The sympathetic nervous system is what controls vascular tone in your body. So if you had a spinal cord sever at T1 or L2, there's a good chance that you may go into neurogenic shock. Neurogenic shock is caused from the inadequate supply of adrenergic neurotransmitters throughout the body. There are two types of these ganglions, and they exist in paired and unpaired. A paired ganglion, a chain ganglion on either side of the vertebral column, contains neurons that control effectors in the body. Unpaired contains ganglions that innervate tissue and organs in the abdominal pelvic cavity. So an example of this, if I dump out adrenaline or I give somebody a synthetic shot of adrenaline, I don't have to have the pre-site at all. I've given them the drug that works on the post-site. And since these are not in the same location, that these may be unpaired, this will work just fine. Somatic and the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system, the somatic nervous system work kind of differently. In the somatic side, we have physical control over it. So this is going to be skeletal muscle at your target and working down in physical movement. So I moved the glass. Where in the autonomic nervous system, will control things that we don't really have physical control over. Example is smooth muscle, and this would be the vascular beds of the tunica media. Glands that would secrete various hormones throughout the body. Cardiac muscle responds to the autonomic nervous system, and then adipocytes or fat cells would respond. Example, fight or flight. If I needed extra energy because I'm having to go toe to toe with T-Rex or a crocodile or whatever, does it make sense that I'm going to need an extra energy source? All of this would be outside of my physical control to manage. So the autonomic nervous system would kick in and assist me. Sympathetic nervous system, and this is controlled kind of automatically. This is fight or flight, and these are all of the areas: the eyeball, salivary glands, heart, lungs, liver, stomach, spleen. All of these have a adrenergic receptor site to them, or have a post-ganglionic site that would respond to a loading dose of epinephrine. Example, the lungs have a beta-2 receptor site on them. The heart has both beta-1 and beta-2. The actual, where's the vessels at? The vessels have an alpha-1 receptor site to them. Now all of these alphas and betas are adrenergic receptor sites. Alpha-1, alpha-2, beta-1, beta-2, and we'll talk about those here in the future. But these are how all of this through here is the postganglion, whether it be directly innervated or would respond to the collateral ganglion being stimulated. In either case, this would be from the release of adrenaline from the kidneys that would go systemic and hit essentially all of these organs. Sympathetic innervation, and this is a part that is paired. So your action potential comes here, norepinephrine is released, and then the receptor site on the post end receives the norepinephrine. And what will break it down is one of these two things here. And there's a test question over this. Monoamine oxidase or choleomethyltransferase. Both of these substances are the adrenergic or the sympathetic nervous system's version of acetylcholinesterase. So whatever's left over will be broken down by these two substances. The parasympathetic division, and this is rest or digest. You have a big cranial nerve that takes care of about 75% of all of the parasympathetic tone that occurs in the body. Parasympathetic tone is controlled pretty much by the vagus nerve, which is actually 10th cranial nerve. My apologies, 10th cranial nerve. Parasympathetic nervous system, and if you'll notice here, these are all cranial nerves that control various, and look at how many that this guy right here controls, which is all of this stuff here. This is all controlled by the vagus nerve, and these are mostly going to be tissues that reside within inside of the abdominal, pelvic, and thoracic cavities. All of these are controlled by the 10th cranial nerve. One of the things that comes to mind here is whenever they do a heart transplant, they'll cut out this heart and they'll sever the vagus nerve. From that point forward, this heart is considered a denervated heart, which we'll come back to and talk about in future lectures. Parasympathetic innervations, we've kind of seen this before. Synaptic vesicles, this is going to release a neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter is called acetylcholine, or ACH. Whenever it hits the postsynaptic terminal or its receptor, and the information is received and it continues, then we get a release of acetylcholinesterase. Now the acetylcholinesterase binds up the acetylcholine and will kind of recycle it. 4.27, aging in the nervous system. We're going to talk about Alzheimer's disease, cerebrovascular accidents, and neurological trauma. In Alzheimer's, what we get is essentially an atrophy or a degradation of the brain. And if I want to take a look at this over here, this is an Alzheimer's patient, and this is a normal brain. So do you see how the brain actually atrophies, cause shrinkage? This poses a problem. Normal function, neurological function kind of goes out the window at some point on an Alzheimer's patient. A cerebrovascular accident, you're going to need this section of brain tissue, I can promise you. Whenever blood gets in here, swelling, all of this area becomes necrotic from the pressure buildup of the blood. So this area essentially necroses or dies off. Can cause major neurological deficit. This is a CVA. This is a bleed that's in an isolated area. So this right here is not going to be so healthy. Neurological trauma. Since the brain has a blood supply to it, which of course it does, we get something called coup contre coup, and essentially everything moves until acted upon by an outside force. So if your head goes back, the shear force, and as it bounces off the back of the wall, back of the skull, and starts to move forward again, we can get shear force here that lacerates these vessels and can cause a brain bleed. An example of this would be an epidural hematoma, which is outside of the dura, and this has a bunch of meningeal layers in between it and the brain tissue. So as pressure increases and it starts to bleed, it can cause major sections to herniate or cause a midline shift. In this case here, this is midline shift, and those ventricles, this one here should be somewhere over here, this one should be in the middle, so we have an entire movement of the brain tissue in this direction. This is from a gunshot wound, and again I will assure you that this person needed all of this brain tissue. Cavitation wave occurs in a gunshot wound as well that can cause secondary tissue damage. This would create or hollow out a cavity wherever the projectile pathway went, depending on its caliber and size. This is a herniation. Again, this should look, you should have a ventricle here and a ventricle here. They shouldn't all be pushed this way. And this is from a bleed, probably an epidural. Actually, the blood's all the way back to here. And this pushed on the tissue and caused what's considered a herniation. Figure 8.51, these are all the functional relationships between the nervous system and the other various spots. Please look over those. You're going to see a large amount of collateral communication between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Quick summary, review the cellular organization of the neural tissue, understand how neurons function and the membrane potentials are created, review how neurons communicate with each other, and this is through synapses, through the dendrite end. Review the components of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, central nervous system being brain and spinal column, peripheral nervous system being the control elements through the dorsal and ventral horn. Understand how the autonomic nervous system affects the body, and this is things that are run automatically. And these are all the terms to know. Now you should find these actually on the flashcards: action potential, autonomic nervous system, axon, cerebellum, cerebrospinal fluid, cerebrium, cranial nerves, dicephalon, dual innervation, ganglion, ganglia, hypothalamus, limbic system, medulla oblongata, membrane potential, meninges, midbrain, nerve plexus, neuroglia, neurotransmitter, parasympathetic division, postsynaptic reflex, pons, postganglionic fiber, preganglionic neuron, reflex, somatic nervous system, spinal nerves, and the sympathetic division. If you have any questions over this chapter, please feel free to contact me, Roy Smith, 405-219-7613, or you can email me at smithr@imsa.net. Thank you.